Police in Central California find themselves in the midst of a violent crime wave. At first, the deaths appear unrelated. But detectives uncover evidence that points to a single killer. In Virginia, women start turning up dead in their own homes. And it appears a sadistic serial killer is to blame. But until police can identify a suspect, they remain powerless to stop him. When there is no obvious connection between victim and killer, solving a murder can be difficult. But forensic experts can play a vital role in exposing the predator who chooses random targets. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. California's central coastline is famous for its rugged beauty and isolation. But in the early 1980s, the city of Santa Cruz became the backdrop for a series of violent crimes. On April 23rd, rescue workers and police from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office responded to a call about a vehicle found burning along a rural mountain road. The car had been burning for hours and was completely destroyed. To authorities, it appeared to be the work of vandals. But a closer inspection revealed a much more gruesome act than arson. A human body, burnt beyond recognition, lay in the front seat. The unidentified victim was removed from the burned-out wreckage and transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. Investigators began searching for clues to explain the fire. But they found none of the telltale signs suggesting that an accident or engine trouble were to blame. A check on the tags revealed the car was registered to 20-year-old Mark Farrell, who listed an address less than a mile from the scene.
1 Frank John Mary.
Detective Sergeant David Deverell oversaw the investigation. The lack of an obvious cause of the fire was troubling.
There was no reason for the car to have caught fire. There was no dynamic crash. It's very unusual to have, a body burnt up in a vehicle with no explanation as to how it happens.
Police hoped the autopsy would yield more answers.
This is Farrell.
With Detective Deverell present, forensic pathologist Dr. Richard Mason began his examination by x-raying the victim. After reviewing the results, it was clear this death was no accident.
I could see evidence of at least 3, possibly 4 bullet pathways through the chest, entering on the right and exiting on the left. There was also a very probable gunshot wound to the head.
The young male victim had been murdered. But the heat of the fire had destroyed any ballistics evidence that may have been left behind. But then, embedded in the young man's chest, Dr. Mason found a single bullet that had somehow survived the intense heat. Dr. Mason, a gun enthusiast, analyzed the fragment under a microscope. It was a unique bullet.
I'm a longtime handgun rifle shooter, and I recognized it immediately as a 38 Special Wad Cutter. They are heavy, they're very penetrative, and they will drill deeply into a body.
Dental records later confirmed that the murder victim was in fact the owner of the burned-out car, 20-year-old Mark Farrell. Now, police had to find out who had killed him and why. Investigators questioned the young man's mother. She couldn't imagine why anyone would have wanted to harm her son. She said she last saw him the previous afternoon. Mark, a college student studying to be an engineer, was late for the night shift where he worked as an analyst at a nearby electronics plant. There didn't seem to be anything that was troubling him. Mark was well liked by everyone who knew him. He didn't have any enemies. With no obvious suspects, police looked to reconstruct the last hours of Mark Farrell's life. His employer confirmed that Mark had worked his entire shift the night before and left around 2 a.m. There were no indications that anything out of the ordinary had happened during his shift. And he said Mark got along well with all of his co-workers. The manager handed over the videotape from the company's security camera. At the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office, Detective Deverell reviewed the tapes.
It's the surveillance.
He watched as Mark Farrell left work without incident.
In looking at the tape, there was certainly nothing unusual in it. Looked like, it was the end of the night. He was headed home. There was absolutely nothing in it.
Weeks passed with no additional leads. Soon, the investigation turned cold. And the caseload for Santa Cruz homicide detectives was about to increase. 2 months after the murder of Mark Farrell, the tranquility of the nearby community of Laguna Beach was shattered. The lifeless bodies of 2 men were discovered on the beach. Officers and crime scene technicians were dispatched to the scene.
Right about here.
Right.
They saw him.
There, they found 2 young Asian men who had both been shot in the back multiple times. Police began processing the scene for clues. In the breast pocket of one of the victims, they found a wallet.
All right.
See anything else? Or?
I don't. That's good. I got the shot. We can put him back down and
Okay.
we'll check the wallet for ID.
Okay.
And inside was identification belonging to a man named Check Chin, a resident of San Francisco.
You've got some.
Police could find no ID on the second victim.
Craig, is it okay if I come in from this angle here?
Here, and then we'll check him for
Right.
ID.
His wallet was missing.
It looks like he's got a set of keys.
However, they located a set of car keys. Detectives theorized the double murder was the result of a robbery gone bad. Using the set of keys, police were able to locate the victim's car.
Let's get the distance between 2 and 7.
Based on the vehicle registration, they believed that the second victim was the car's owner, 30-year-old Han Lee, also from San Francisco.
Looks pretty good. So we'll get Dave in here and let him know what we're going to
How's it looking there?
As police began looking for clues to the killer's identity, they noticed one empty spot in the nearby parking lot. And in the space were fresh tire tracks.
Somewhere this guy may have driven, so.
Yeah, so we'll catch this guy and
Unsure if the killer had left the marks, crime scene technicians collected the evidence using a plaster cast mold.
sticky.
the nature of the double murder troubled police.
It was a really unusual scene for us. We had two bodies up here on the trail. Multiple homicide is certainly something we don't see. It's something that concerned us greatly.
The victims' bodies were transported to the coroner's office for autopsy. Again, Dr. Richard Mason worked the case.
Sure. This, when you're done with the overviews, while he's in his position, we'll get the ID shot.
He extracted the fatal bullets from the victims' backs. He had seen them before. They were unique .38 caliber wad cutters, identical to the bullet recovered from the body of Mark Farrell 2 months earlier. Police now had 3 unsolved murders on their hands, and it appeared the same gun had been used in all of the homicides. Dr. Mason and Detective Deverell realized it was too much of a coincidence to be ignored.
It's an unusual gun.
Police in Santa Cruz, California had 3 unsolved homicides on their hands. And the bullets recovered from all of the victims appeared to have originated from the same gun. To find out, the bullets were forwarded to ballistics expert Paul Doherty at the San Mateo Police Crime Lab. From the size and diameter, he confirmed that all were .38 caliber wad cutter bullets. Typically, wad cutters are used for target shooting.
A wad cutter is a projectile that's designed to punch a hole in paper for target shooting. So you get a nice clean hole so you can measure your accuracy of your score. In other words, in some cases when you get right on the line, you want to make sure you're cut. If you've cut the line, the score goes higher, and that's what this does. It just cuts a nice clean hole.
Each gun leaves unique markings on a bullet as it travels through the barrel. When examiners compared the bullet recovered from 20-year-old Mark Farrell to the ones taken from the 2 Asian victims found at Laguna Beach, they found that all shared the same characteristics. And after extensive research, authorities determined that the markings left on the bullets had likely been produced by a rare Great Western single-action revolver.
Manufacturer and see if we can't get somewhere with that. Although it becomes a little problematic when you start looking.
It was a promising lead, but it was nearly impossible for police to track down everyone who currently owned the handgun.
I don't think it's a standard manufacturer.
And though it seemed unlikely, Detective Dave Deverell had to consider that the 3 murders were unconnected.
Between that and the gun, we'll get there. You look at it and go, well, maybe the gun got passed from one person to another, and there really is no connection between the cases. That didn't work for any of us. It just didn't make sense that a gun and bullets would somehow transfer from one person to another and be used again in another homicide.
To find out if there was a connection, detectives traveled to San Francisco's Chinatown district, where the 2 Laguna Beach victims, Han Lee and Chek Chin, had lived. It's a notoriously insulated community, and investigators realized that getting information would not be easy. A team from the Santa Cruz Sheriff's Office worked the case. Homicide Detective Joe Hennard uncovered a possible lead.
We had information that both victims had worked at the Golden Dragon restaurant in Chinatown, where 2 years prior there was a gangland shooting where a number of people were murdered. We were concerned that there could have been gang activity, that these guys were followed down to Santa Cruz and were shot and killed on the way over to the beach. And an interpreter, Mr. Liu.
Through an interpreter from the San Francisco Police Department's Asian Gang Task Force, the manager of the restaurant described the two young men as decent, hard-working employees. In fact, he last saw them the day before they were found murdered. It was payday, and the men were anxious to receive their checks. They had made plans to take a day trip down to Laguna Beach. The manager didn't believe the two men were involved in any gang activity. He could think of no one who would have wanted to harm them. Having found no connection between the victims, detectives realized they were powerless to prevent more killings.
We got a photo of our...
Soon, the investigation into the murders of Mark Farrell, Check Chin, and Han Lee had hit a dead end.
Just need to do a little more work up. The case was very frustrating. We had the bullets linking the murders. We knew what type of gun we were looking for. We had a lot of evidence in the case, but we didn't have even a glimmer of why these three people were killed.
But a year and a half later, all of that changed. A man named Dave Bonin contacted police. His daughter, Lynn, he said, was in great danger. She had recently broken up with her boyfriend, Mark Cunningham, and now he was stalking her. The daughter feared for her life. Mark Cunningham had allegedly bragged about killing 3 men a year and a half earlier.
Okay, thanks.
It was the break police had been waiting for. The father took them to speak with Lynn at the grocery store where she worked. His daughter was afraid to speak to police about Cunningham, so he offered to bring her out of the store. But there was just one complication. Mark Cunningham was there, talking to Lynn. Dave Bonin got his daughter's attention and brought her outside. When Detective Dave Deverell heard the suspect was inside, he quickly interviewed Lynn.
And kind of did just the quickest interview on record. You know, we kind of went, Lynn, your dad tells us that your boyfriend may have killed some people, and we need to know what happened.
Lynn told police that a year and a half earlier, she and Mark Cunningham were driving around near Laguna Beach. Suddenly, Mark pulled into a parking spot, claiming he needed cash. He said he'd be right back, but he wouldn't tell her where he was going. Lynn told police he was gone for several minutes. She recalled that when he returned, he was agitated and out of breath. She thought she saw a gun in his possession. Police realized it was the same spot where the 2 Asian men were found murdered.
It became apparent to us in this real brief interview with Lynn, Mark was the guy we were looking for.
As Lynn finished telling her story, Mark Cunningham exited the store. In a wide-open parking lot, there was any number of ways the suspect could escape. And if Mark Cunningham was in fact the killer, police feared he would not hesitate to use violence. After a year and a half, police in Santa Cruz, California finally had a solid lead in 3 unsolved homicides.
Why don't you guys come on over here?
Mark Cunningham had allegedly bragged to his ex-girlfriend that he was responsible for the shooting deaths. Cunningham was cooperative and taken into custody without incident.
All right, what is this for? I'll tell you just.
It's a good start.
Under
Mark,
questioning, he insisted he knew nothing about any of the murders.
I'm sorry, I really.
He claimed that his girlfriend, Lynn Bonin, was trying to get back at him for ending the relationship. He denied owning a Great Western single-action revolver, the type of weapon used in the 3 killings. Police didn't believe him, but they had no hard evidence to prove he was lying. Still, Cunningham remained in police custody. When a few days passed with no additional leads, police turned to his ex-girlfriend for more information. Lynn Bonin had reason to believe that Cunningham had committed the murders.
We just threw it over.
She said that a few days after the 2 men were found murdered at Laguna Beach, Cunningham admitted to the crimes.
What are you gonna do about it? Come here.
Then, without warning, he pulled out an old revolver and forced Lynn to the ground. He threatened to kill her and her father if she ever said anything to police. A short while later, Cunningham got rid of the revolver.
He just told me to sit there and wait.
Lynn didn't know anything about Mark Farrell, the 20-year-old man who had been shot and burned in his car along a mountain road.
Mark, at some point, did Mark leave?
I don't know.
However, in the past, she and Cunningham and some friends would hang out on that road and have bonfires. Cunningham would often brandish his weapon at passers-by who complained about the illegal fires. Police had strong circumstantial evidence linking Mark Cunningham to the scenes where all 3 victims had been found murdered.
There's a lot. They're doing anything.
Now they needed hard evidence.
No,
They turned to the tire tread marks found at Laguna Beach nearly 2 years earlier. The tires from the truck that had been driven at the time of the murders had been sold, but police were able to track down the current owners. The tires were collected and forwarded to the crime lab for analysis. First, examiners generated an inked impression of Cunningham's tire treads. Then, transparent overlays were placed on top of life-size photographs of the tire tread found at Laguna Beach nearly 2 years earlier. They found that all of the class characteristics, including the shape, size, and dimensions of the tread design, lined up perfectly. The evidence had placed Mark Cunningham's vehicle at the scene of the double murder. But to tie him to all 3 homicides, they needed to find the murder weapon. Lynn Bonin agreed to help. She brought investigators to the area where she believed the gun had been tossed. It appeared to be a waste of time. But then, buried under dirt and debris, they found a pistol. It was a rare Great Western single-action revolver. To prove it was the murder weapon, police forwarded the evidence to forensic examiners. Ballistics expert Paul Doherty knew it would not be easy. Rust had severely damaged the weapon. But after days of cleaning the revolver, he was able to get the gun to fire.
3, 2, 1, fire. Firing.
Ballistics tests proved that the gun was used in both the Laguna Beach murders and the death of 20-year-old Mark Farrell. Cunningham was subsequently charged with 3 counts of murder. Police theorized that Cunningham had started a small bonfire by the side of the road. Mark Farrell, headed home after a long night of work, saw the flames and stopped to find out what was going on. Without warning, Cunningham pulled his gun and shot the young man several times. In an effort to cover his tracks, Cunningham then doused the car with a flammable substance, then set the vehicle on fire. It was a crime of opportunity, one the killer would repeat several weeks later at Laguna Beach. Mark Cunningham was tried and convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. Mark Cunningham preyed on victims who happened to cross his path. But in Richmond, Virginia, one killer carefully looked for targets that shared something in common. On the morning of September 19th, 1987, a man noticed a car with its engine running pulled up onto the sidewalk. It appeared the vehicle had been abandoned. The man called police.
Richmond 911, may I help you?
911 dispatchers ran a check on the tags and learned the car was registered to a woman who lived a few blocks away from where the vehicle was found. But when efforts to contact her failed, police tracked down her landlord. An officer was dispatched to the residence. The landlord was also concerned. She had noticed a missing window screen and feared the place had been burglarized. Not knowing what to expect, the officer cautiously made his way through the apartment. In the bedroom, he made a gruesome discovery. A woman lay dead.
Dispatch, come back.
She had been tied up and strangled. Within minutes, Richmond police and crime scene technicians were dispatched to the scene. The woman, found fully clothed, was identified as 35-year-old Donna Doyle.
Still there, yeah.
No items appeared to be missing. Robbery was not the motive behind the murder. Believing the killer had gained access to the residence through the window, technicians scoured the area for prints. But they found nothing. And the victim's car, which had likely been taken by the killer and then abandoned, yielded no additional clues. At autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the death had resulted from ligature strangulation. The device had been fashioned from a sock, shoestring, and vacuum cleaner pipe. Donna Doyle had been slowly strangled. Though the victim was clothed in cut-off jeans and a shirt, there were indications she had been sexually assaulted. Biological evidence of rape and some stray hairs were collected. At the time, DNA testing was in its infancy. and all serologists could determine was that the killer had type O blood. Homicide detective Ray Williams was assigned the case. He realized this investigation would not be simple.
I worked homicide for 20-some odd years in the city, and after looking and reviewing the scene, I knew it to be a very unusual homicide. The way she was tied and strangled was very apparent to me that at that point we weren't dealing with an ordinary killer.
Hoping for more detailed information, the hairs recovered from Donna Doyle's body were forwarded to forensic experts at the Virginia Division of Forensic Science. They determined that 2 of the hairs had not originated from the victim. And from their texture and cross-sectional shape, examiners concluded they had come from an African-American male. For investigators, it wasn't much to go on. To learn more, detectives questioned the employer of a local bookstore where Donna Doyle worked. On the day of the murder, Donna had worked her regular shift. Nothing out of the ordinary had happened that day. She described Donna as a dedicated employee and a very likable person, although she was somewhat shy. After closing the store, Donna headed home. Her employer didn't know if she had plans that night. She believed that Donna lived alone and was unaware if she currently had a boyfriend. After 2 weeks, detectives had no luck identifying a suspect or an obvious motive. The investigation into Donna Doyle's murder was going nowhere. Then, emergency dispatchers received a 911 call. There had been another homicide. As police in Richmond, Virginia struggled to solve the brutal rape and murder of 35-year-old Donna Doyle, they received word of another homicide. The victim, identified as 32-year-old Dr. Stephanie Harris, was discovered inside the bedroom closet by her husband. The scene was less than 2 miles from the site of Donna Doyle's murder. Her hands and feet were bound, and a cloth belt was wrapped tightly around her neck. She had been sexually assaulted. For police, the crime scene looked eerily familiar. There were no indications of robbery, and it appeared the killer had entered through a window. But few clues to his identity were found. The victim's husband explained that he discovered his wife around 2 a.m. upon returning from Maryland, where he was a law student. He had no idea who could have done this. He was later cleared as a suspect. Police sensed the 2 murders were connected. To find out, Chief Medical Examiner Marcella Fierro began examining Dr. Stephanie Harris. She found broken blood vessels in the victim's eyes, called petechial hemorrhages. Like the Donna Doyle case, that suggested Stephanie Harrison had been strangled slowly.
When the victims were examined, there were certain patterns of injuries that were common, and those patterns included evidence of restraint, evidence of strangulation, evidence of injury that took place over a period of time, which was very disturbing because it would indicate a pattern of torture.
The similarities between the crimes led authorities to believe that the same sadistic killer had committed both murders.
When you do autopsies, you get some insight into the nature of the person who committed the crimes. It was apparent from the injuries, from the restraints, and from their physical findings that these were very cruel deaths and that they were committed by somebody who enjoyed doing it.
The biological evidence recovered from Stephanie Harrison was sent to forensic serologists. An analysis revealed that those samples and the ones collected from Donna Doyle shared the same blood type. Both were type O.
Okay, folks, let's fall in.
Richmond police were certain that the same killer, dubbed by the press as the Southside Strangler, had committed both murders.
We've got the evening watch. Our target is
And having found no obvious connection between the two victims, it appeared he chose his victims randomly. They feared he would strike again. The question now was where and when.
Which is known as the River Channel.
They got their answer 2 months later. On November 22nd, 1987, police just a few miles outside of Richmond in Chesterfield County were dispatched to the scene of a murder. The victim, 15-year-old Dawn Chang, had been viciously raped and strangled in her bedroom. Like the other cases, the perpetrator had entered the bedroom through the window.
Here's what we got, the 8.
Strangely, investigators found a figure 8 painted on the victim's body. But aside from a few stray hairs, little physical evidence was recovered. However, the hairs were enough for authorities to conclude that Dawn Chang had been the Southside Strangler's third victim. Unlike the other victims, Dawn was a teenager. She was Asian, and she didn't live alone. In fact, her parents were sleeping in the next room at the time of the murder. They never heard a thing.
15.
They described their daughter as a typical teenager.
It's a recent picture.
Great, time for me to get back to work.
You have a lot of work to do?
Yes.
They last saw her the night before.
Go study.
After dinner, Dawn said she had some homework to do and planned on going to bed after she finished. She said goodnight and went to her bedroom. The mother discovered her daughter's lifeless body the following morning. Authorities had a serial killer on the loose, and he appeared to be spreading out beyond the Richmond city limits. His ability to avoid detection led police to believe he had done this before. Desperate to generate a lead, Detective Ray Williams contacted police departments throughout the region, looking for any unsolved cases with a similar MO. Less than 100 miles away, in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Arlington, Virginia, he got a hit. There, Detective Joe Horgus of the Arlington County Police Department had several unsolved rapes and murders that went back nearly 3 years. The details of those were frighteningly similar to the murders in Richmond and Chesterfield County. 3 weeks after 15-year-old Dawn Chang's homicide, Arlington County Police had been dispatched to the home of Sandra Thomas.
Watch where we're stepping.
The 34-year-old woman had been discovered raped and murdered in her home. She lived alone, and like the victims in Richmond, she had been strangled with household items. From hairs and biological evidence recovered from the scene, police determined that Sandra Thomas's killer was an African-American male with type O blood. The other unsolved crimes in Arlington with a similar MO had been committed in 1984. At first, it seemed odd to Detective Horgus that the killer would suddenly stop, only to resume 3 years later.
He didn't stop because he's got a girlfriend. He didn't stop because he got married. He stopped because he either relocated, he's dead, and he's not dead if he's doing the other ones, or he's in prison.
Detective Horgus reviewed recent parole and probation records, looking for African-American males who were arrested in Arlington in 1984. Then he found something. In early 1984, a 21-year-old man named Timothy W. Spencer was arrested in connection with a series of breaking and entering and petty thefts. Though those were non-violent crimes, records also indicated he was identified as the prime suspect in a series of unsolved rapes throughout Arlington. However, he was never charged with those crimes. After serving 3 years on the theft charges, Spencer was paroled. And that wasn't all.
His probation officer here in Arlington knew that he was released from prison to a halfway house down in Richmond. And he was released about 2 weeks before the first murder.
If Detective Horgus was right, Timothy Spencer was now the prime suspect in at least 4 murders throughout Virginia. But unless investigators could physically link him to the crimes, he would remain free to kill again. Police in Arlington, Virginia had finally identified a suspect in a series of unsolved rapes and murders that spanned a 3-year period. And those homicides bore an eerie resemblance to a string of serial murders taking place 100 miles away in Richmond.
All right, here's Tucker's hams.
To find out if they were dealing with the same predator, Arlington County Homicide Detective Joe Horgus traveled to Richmond. There, he teamed up with Detective Ray Williams. After comparing the details of all the homicides, there could be little doubt that the same killer had committed all of the crimes. The detectives learned that their prime suspect, Timothy Spencer, had been recently paroled and was currently living in a halfway house in Richmond. According to the director of the house, the suspect was currently out running errands. Detectives asked to see the logbook that contained the times and dates of when a parolee leaves and returns to the house. According to the records, Timothy Spencer had signed himself out on September 18th, October 2nd, and November 21st. Dates that corresponded to the murders in Richmond and Chesterfield County. He had also signed out on November 25th to spend Thanksgiving weekend with his mother in Arlington. Arlington County Detective Joe Horgus realized that Timothy Spencer's mother lived just a few blocks from where the latest victim, Sandra Thomas, had been murdered that same weekend.
What are the odds that 100 miles away, our lady up here that's murdered, MO fits identical to theirs down there, and where's Timothy Spencer? He's up here at the same time. Too many coincidences just don't add up. What it adds up to is logic. This is our man.
A short while later, Timothy Spencer returned home. And police were there waiting. The suspected serial killer was taken into custody on suspicion of murder.
Hand behind your back. He'll tell you just a minute here.
A search of his room at the halfway house failed to produce any hard evidence linking him to the murders. But on his bed, they discovered a drawing of a figure 8, similar to the one found painted on the body of 15-year-old Dawn Chang.
All right, I'm gonna show you a couple
Under
pictures.
questioning, Spencer admitted nothing.
Jog your memory a little bit. See if you recognize these folks, okay? Do you know that person? No.
He claimed to have no knowledge about any rapes or murders.
Have you ever been to
And he denied drawing the figure 8 found on his bed.
Yeah.
Detectives sensed he was lying, and now they looked to the forensic evidence for proof. Hair and blood samples were collected from the suspect. At the Virginia Division of Forensic Science, criminalists compared the hairs taken from Spencer to those recovered from several of the crime scenes. The shape, size, color, and texture of the hairs were identical. Though Timothy Spencer had type O blood, so did millions of other people. For irrefutable proof that he was the Southside Strangler, examiners turned to a newly developed, more sophisticated type of analysis called DNA testing. The testing revealed that the genetic profile of the suspect was identical to the ones generated from the biological evidence left behind at 4 murder scenes. The chances that the killer was someone other than Timothy Spencer were nearly 900 million to 1. He was charged with 4 counts of murder. Investigators theorized that after randomly choosing his prey, Spencer, an experienced burglar, would slip silently through his victims' windows. Once inside, he raped and strangled them. Timothy Spencer was sentenced to death for the murders of Donna Doyle, Dr. Stephanie Harrison, and Dawn Chang in Richmond, and for the death of Sandra Thomas in Arlington. He was the first person in the United States to be executed on the basis of DNA fingerprinting. For Richmond homicide detective Ray Williams, the new forensic technology could not have come along at a better time.
Were it not for DNA evidence, Timothy Spencer would have never been convicted. See, when you put a case before a jury, the jury has to see, touch, feel, and hear. We didn't have a whole lot of things for them to see, touch, feel, and hear, other than DNA. And that DNA spoke for itself.
Some killers require no motive at all to commit their crimes. And for homicide detectives, identifying a suspect can be a challenge. In those cases, they must rely on the physical evidence to expose a killer who has set his sights on random targets. In Tampa, Florida, women become a sadistic killer's prey, and cemeteries his personal dumping ground. As the body count rises, detectives confront a serial killer using science as their only weapon. In North Carolina, a young mother disappears on her way home from work. When her body is discovered, detectives must expose the hidden tracks of a killer if they are to find justice for her family. In most homicides, police rely on motive to pursue a murderer. But when the killer is a stranger, the crime may go unsolved for years. It takes a full arsenal of forensic techniques to trace a lethal encounter. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. Tampa, Florida, October 10th, 1986.
10-4, 1051, responding.
Detective Robert Parrish received a disturbing call.
2 minutes.
A jogger had discovered the nude body of a young black woman at Centro Espinal Cemetery. Crime scene investigators were dispatched to the scene. As they set up a perimeter, Detective Parrish questioned the jogger. Ron Denny said he ran through the cemetery daily. He rarely saw anyone. But this morning was different. The detective examined the body for injuries.
We had a nude black female in an open cemetery lot here. We found no signs of any cutting or stabbing, anything, no open wounds like that. She did have a fine mist of blood on her right side, appeared to come out of her nasal area. This indicating that she had died either by blunt trauma or by asphyxiation.
Based on the condition of the body, it appeared the victim had been murdered less than 12 hours earlier.
Over here, so it looks like she was thrown out of a truck.
More than enough time for the killer to flee. Detective Parrish knew it would be a difficult case. They had to conduct a thorough search of the crime scene. As they photographed the victim, they noted she was barefoot. Oddly, the bottoms of her feet were clean. The ground was moist. She couldn't have walked to this location, and investigators saw no evidence she was dragged. The victim's personal effects were scattered all over the area. Each piece was numbered and cataloged as potential evidence.
We found her panties and top and her wig scattered throughout when we did a crime scene search.
The forensics team recovered a pair of women's shoes. There were also beer bottles and a cigarette pack. But there was no wallet or driver's license to identify the victim. Not far from the body, investigators found fresh tire tracks. Detective Parrish surmised the victim had been killed elsewhere and dumped in the cemetery.
The major item that we found was 9 feet from her head in the soft dirt there was a tire impression, obviously made by a big tire. Additionally, off 46th Street here, we had tire tracks coming in and what appeared tire tracks leaving.
A large vehicle, a truck or an SUV, made the tracks. Technicians made casts of the tread prints using plaster. Based on the condition of the body, investigators were confident a vehicle had been involved in the crime. The plaster would set in minutes, but it would take days to determine whether the tracks were significant. After processing the crime scene, officers canvassed the neighborhood, hoping that someone might have seen or heard something the night before.
When was the last time you talked to her?
I'm not sure.
Nobody had. At autopsy, the medical examiner noted pitula, a pinpoint hemorrhage in the victim's eyes. This, as well as linear abrasions on the collarbone and throat area, indicated that the victim had died from asphyxiation. Several bones in her neck were also broken. The medical examiner determined that a large individual had used his hands to manually strangle the victim. Ligature marks on her wrists revealed she had been bound before she was killed. Based on the degree of rigor mortis and the amount of insect activity, the medical examiner concluded that she'd been killed less than 12 hours earlier. Strands of the victim's hair were collected. In the event a suspect emerged, it was possible a strand of her hair was still in the suspect's vehicle. Identifying the victim was their next priority. Fingerprints were taken and run through the Tampa police database. Within hours, Detective Parrish had a match. The victim was 34-year-old Tamara Jones.
After I found her identity, I located her mom and broke the news to her mom, and then got as much information. You get as much background information you can about her habits, who she was seeing, any steady boyfriends. About what you'd seen on that night.
From Tamara's mother, Detective Parrish learned a lot about the victim. She had been an outgoing girl, full of promise, until the lure of crack cocaine reduced her to a life of painful addiction. To pay for her habit, Tamara became a prostitute.
There was about 4 different bars in what we call the West Tampa area that she frequented. And in my job as an investigator, I had to go to the bars, find out who she knew, who she was seeing with, and just do some good legwork. You know, I found out that everybody spoke fairly highly of her. All the people I interviewed said that she was a very good girl, and she was a very good individual.
But Tamara's life on the streets put her in contact with a lot of unsavory characters. No one that the police talked to was able to pinpoint a suspect in Tamara's murder. Detective Parrish hit a dead end. He now looked for clues in other unsolved homicide cases. Not only from Tampa, but in Hillsborough County and surrounding cities. It took a week to review 2 years' worth of homicide files, looking for similarities. In the end, Detective Parrish was stunned by what he found.
Detectives had been working on several of the reports of previous homicides and similar type victims. We had other black females. They were known prostitutes. They were found in cemeteries. They were nude. They were all strangled. They had ligature marks around their wrist, which means they had been either tied up or a restraining type device used on their wrist.
Detectives from the Tampa Police Department and Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office pooled their resources. Along with other agencies in the area, they formed a task force to find and stop a killer. But the lack of physical evidence found at each of the crime scenes and the lifestyle of the victims made them difficult cases to solve. Detective Parrish was certain they were dealing with a serial killer. Somewhere in the Tampa area, he was waiting to strike again. And police hadn't a single clue to his identity. Authorities in Tampa, Florida were certain they were dealing with a serial killer. 2 recent homicides bore striking similarities to a string of murders that went back over 2 years. Detective Robert Parrish knew they needed a suspect. But none of the investigators working the case had even a clue.
All the other detectives were obviously involved in the other cases who were at different stages, but you know, nobody really had anything concrete that we could say 100% sure. Several of the other detectives had different leads that they were investigating.
And Garden of Memories.
News reports about the latest victim caught the attention of a potential witness. A man named Adam Childs contacted police. He told them that he knew Tamara Jones from the Tampa bar scene. He had seen her the night before her body was found in the cemetery. A dark truck approached Tamara on the street. She talked to the man inside. Childs had seen the vehicle in the neighborhood, but he didn't know to whom it belonged. For investigators, the dark truck rang a bell. They searched their files once again. 8 months earlier, a prostitute claimed that a customer in a dark truck had tried to kill her. The woman was afraid to press charges, but she agreed to speak with police about the incident.
Then, what happened inside the truck?
As she told investigators, a large black man she knew as Big Mike tried to pick her up that evening.
They were talking about, selling on a price for sex, and then he had grabbed her around the throat and started to choke her. She reached for the doorknob, and then she got out, ran, and screaming through the neighborhood. The police were called, and he had fled the scene.
She gave investigators descriptions of Big Mike and the truck he was driving.
We can put him behind bars.
But she again refused to press charges or to testify against him.
Can you use both his hands or one hand?
Investigators checked their files. Big Mike was the nickname of a Tampa man named Michael Tyrone Crump. Police went to Crump's residence. The suspect was not at home, but a dark truck matching the witness's description was parked in the driveway. The officer photographed the vehicle. Detective Parrish then asked Adam Childs to come back to the station.
I did what's called a photo pack. I took, 6 different pictures of different trucks, including this individual we now become to label as a suspect. And the witness immediately picked out the truck.
Tampa police believed that Michael Tyrone Crump had committed at least 2 crimes, but they didn't have sufficient evidence to arrest him. Based on their 2 witnesses, they did have probable cause that these crimes were committed in his truck. And police have the authority to seize a vehicle if they believe it was used for illegal activities and may contain evidence of those crimes. Detective Parrish wanted to seize Crump's vehicle in a public place when it was on a public roadway.
We stopped the truck on the city streets and informed the driver, who turned out to be Michael Tyrone Crump, that we needed his truck for evidence. It was used in a recent crime.
Contact me at. When we finish processing your truck, I'll give you a call.
Crump remained calm, even when they asked if he knew Tamara Jones.
Good luck.
He said no. They informed him that he was not under arrest and that he was free to go. His truck was taken to the Pinellas County Sheriff's impound lot, where it was examined by trace evidence specialist Timothy Whitfield.
As a part of searching the vehicle, we were charged with finding any and all evidence that might be in there, from the things that are visible to the things that might be invisible to the naked eye.
Investigators first processed the vehicle for visible evidence. They found a woman's earring on the floor of the cab.
Go ahead and put that in a bag.
They also found a wooden device with a piece of rope attached called a garrote. Whitfield had no doubt as to its purpose.
It could be used to wrap the hands or feet of victims, and of course that's something that is unusual. Not everybody has that in their vehicle, and you would ask the question, well, why do you need this? What are you using it for if you're not using it as a restraint device?
Hidden between the rubber matting and the tire wall, investigators found another clue. It was a driver's license belonging to Janet King, one of the young women killed prior to Tamara Jones. Her body had also been found in a cemetery. Since King was a prostitute and Crump was a known John, the item in itself could be explained away. But to Whitfield, the location of the license was incriminating.
Either it was intentionally placed there by the suspect to hide it, or perhaps the victim put it there in hopes that in days to come someone would find something of her in that vehicle.
Now the team focused on evidence invisible to the human eye. They used a chemical called luminol to test for the presence of blood. A phosphorescent glow revealed a fine spray. The pattern was familiar. It matched the blood spatter from Tamara Jones's nose and face. Unfortunately, the droplets were tiny, no larger than pinpoints. There was no way to prove they belonged to the victim.
There was nothing that I was able to do because of the microscopic nature of the blood. That, of course, was prior to the days of DNA, and you needed quite a bit more blood to do complete workups.
Investigators vacuumed the interior of the truck, searching for any hair or fibers that could link the victims to the suspect. One intriguing find was a long knife hidden behind the front seat of the truck.
Got a pretty good sized machete, it looks like. That's pretty good size, but good surface though.
I'll go ahead and secure this.
All right, careful.
In the laboratory, forensic examiners determined that the rope on the garrote was the same diameter as the ligature marks found on the wrists of the victims. Perhaps one of the most important pieces of evidence was a long strand of hair, one that couldn't have come from the suspect. Analysis of the root showed that it had not just fallen out. It had been ripped out of the scalp. The hair strand was compared to samples taken from Tamara Jones. The color and texture didn't match. When it was compared with Janet King's hair, however, it matched. Both were colored with identical hair dye. Technicians were confident that they had come from the same person. While the evidence from inside the truck was compelling, all it proved was that Janet King had been inside the vehicle. Now, detectives needed to tie Michael Tyrone Crump's vehicle to the murders. Time was running out. Without solid evidence, Crump would remain free, and more women could wind up dead. Authorities in Tampa, Florida were certain they were dealing with a serial killer. Two recent homicides bore striking similarities to a string of murders that went back more than 2 years. Detective Robert Parrish needed to connect Tamara Jones' murder to suspect Michael Crump's truck. Tire tracks left at the scene were his best hope. He sent the tire casts made at the crime scene, along with the vehicle's tires, to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. There, analyst Oral Woods studied the treads to see if Crump's truck had made the impressions found near Tamara Jones's body. Woods was surprised that Crump's truck had 3 different types of tires. The 2 front tires had similar treads. The rear tires had different tread designs. 2 of the tread designs on Crump's tires matched the tread designs in the casts made at the crime scene.
And I told Detective Parrish that we're definitely in the ballpark. We definitely could do something with them, that there was class characteristics present in the cast as well as some individual characteristics.
Class characteristics like tire size and tread design can indicate a specific manufacturer. By carefully comparing photographs, Woods determined that the tire tracks at the crime scene had identical class characteristics to Crump's rear tires. He then analyzed the casts and the tires for individual characteristics. Things like nicks, tread wear, or embedded pieces of gravel that can make a tire track as unique as a fingerprint. On the right rear tire, he found what he was looking for.
And I found one area on the tire that had some cuts and nicks, which I was also able to find on the plaster cast that was poured at the crime scene. I went one step further. I made a plaster cast of that area and recorded the same individual characteristics.
Woods confirmed that the tire track found at the crime scene was made by the suspect's right rear tire. On February 7th, Michael Crump went to the Tampa Police Department to ask about getting his truck back. But first, Detective Parrish had some important questions for him. Like how a woman he'd been seen with on October 9th was found dead the next day, and why his tire tracks were found several feet from her body. Crump again denied knowing Tamara Jones. He claimed that he'd been working in the area and cut through the cemetery the night before the murder.
Let me show you something, what was found in your truck. You see that? That's her license. And that was found
But when the detective brought out one more piece of evidence, Janet King's driver's license, Crump was surprised and sensed that he had been caught.
He's a big guy, and he slumped his shoulders down and looked down, which indicated to me that I had, with the license, showing him the license, that I had struck a nerve.
Crump admitted to picking up Tamara Jones on the night in question. He claimed they fought and that Tamara had tried to stab him. He admitted to strangling her, but swore it was in self-defense. To the detective, Crump's version of her death could not explain the restraint device and ligature marks left on the victim. The evidence pointed to a well-planned MO that Crump had used before. Detectives next questioned Crump about the murder of Janet King. He admitted to once having picked her up, but claimed she left him within minutes. He said he knew nothing about the other 7 victims. They didn't buy his explanations.
All indications are that because of the other black females turned up a similar type of death, that he was involved in those. We were able to tie him 100% to 2 of the homicides that were similar, but not enough evidence to tie him to the others.
In separate trials, Crump was found guilty of the murders of both Tamara Jones and Janet King. He received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. The other murder cases remain officially unsolved. Michael Tyrone Crump attacked women he randomly selected from the streets. But in North Carolina, an innocent encounter with a stranger ends in violence and death. On August 8, 1990, a Raleigh, North Carolina police officer responded to a report about a suspicious minivan parked on a side street. the officer called in the tag numbers.
Reply tags Mary Young John 1971.
The vehicle was registered to 24-year-old Katie Valoria, an employee at a nearby hospital. The previous evening, Katie's husband had reported her missing. The officer made a gruesome discovery. Inside the van was the nude, dead body of a young woman. As police cordoned off the area, crime scene investigators arrived on the scene. Detective John Beasley examined the van.
Indications were looking through the windows. There was a struggle inside the van based on the fact that her shoes were located in the front part of the van. Her body is in the back of the van. Pantyhose were around her neck. They had been pulled tight. They weren't knotted or anything, but they were still tight around her neck. It was obvious she had been strangled.
The victim's clothing and purse were missing. There was also evidence suggesting sexual assault. Investigators scoured the exterior of the van for clues. A canine team was called in to assist. The handler gave the dog the scent and commanded him to track. The dog led the handler down the street and away from the van. Crime scene investigator W.E. Hensley was part of the search team.
Basically, it told us that whoever parked that van there, and this early in the morning, got out of the van on the driver's side, went up to the street to the employee parking gate of the hospital, went by that gate and went to an area where there was a parking space. And that was significant.
It appeared the attack had started here. Police searched the area, but found no additional clues. The van was taken to the Raleigh Police impound lot, where the body was removed for autopsy.
I felt that in moving the van, we would remove the entire crime scene with the body in it and move it to a location where it could be processed properly.
Hensley didn't want to lose any critical hair or fiber evidence by opening the van under less than ideal conditions.
Every crime scene tells a story. The time of day, the ambient conditions, who was the victim, what kind of signature might have been left by the suspect. As far as processing the vehicle, we felt that trace evidence, which is hairs, fibers, things of that nature, were going to be very important to the case. Of course, you never rule out the possibility of fingerprints or any other kind of impressions that you might get.
They dusted for prints, but only found a few useless smudges. The killer, it appeared, had tried to wipe his prints before abandoning the vehicle.
Whoever went into that vehicle left some of their self there and then took some of that vehicle with them. And so we were looking for any traces of those two criteria.
In the front seat, they found a pair of women's shoes. They were scraped on both the heel and toe. A set of jumper cables was also found in the front seat.
The jumper cables indicated that possibly the victim was in the process of helping someone with a vehicle problem, probably in the parking lot.
On the driver's floor mat, investigators spotted muddy footprints.
There was an impression on these mats. It appeared to be that of a tennis shoe. We felt possibly that may be of value to us.
But the mats had to be handled with extreme care.
What we had to be concerned with is that the mats are flexible. in flexing the mats or moving them about much, you were going to actually distort the impression left in mud. So we had to keep them perfectly flat, place them in boxes and tape them over so that we could transport these without disturbing the impressions.
Technicians searched for trace evidence. Any hair or fiber adhering to the tape lift would be preserved and examined. They found some hairs embedded in the ceiling of the van. They were inconsistent with the victim's hair, which meant they could belong to her killer. Detectives theorized that the killer had climbed on top of the victim and rubbed his head against the ceiling of the van. Investigator Hensley began to piece together a profile of the killer.
From all indications, he was in the employee parking lot and therefore may be associated with the victim to some extent in that they worked at the same place.
At autopsy, the medical examiner observed contusions on the victim's neck and determined she had been strangled to death. Strands of hair were removed and placed in an envelope. The hairs went to the crime lab, where analysts could compare them to other strands found during the investigation. There was also evidence of sexual assault. The examiner collected samples of biological fluids found on the victim. A brutal rapist and violent killer was loose on the streets of Raleigh, North Carolina. Detectives had to find him before he could strike again. In North Carolina, police investigated the violent rape and murder of a 24-year-old wife and mother. With little information and no witnesses, detectives went to the hospital where Katie Valoria worked. According to her colleagues, Katie was well-liked and had no enemies. On the night of her death, she left work just before 6 p.m. The co-worker described Katie as a devoted wife and mother. She got along well with everyone in the workplace. Katie's colleagues said she couldn't imagine Katie having a single enemy in the world. A colleague who left moments later didn't see her or any strange individuals in the parking lot. Without any witnesses, investigators would have to try a new approach. Since Katie's purse was not in her car, the killer might have stolen her credit cards. Detective Beasley contacted her bank and learned that on the night of the murder, someone used her cash card 3 times at the same ATM.
You got $100 out the first time you used it, and that was all you could write at that time from a cash point. So on one day is $100. He went back, tried to use it again, and then tried to use it a third time.
Detectives retrieved the ATM security camera photos, but they were too blurry to identify the man using the machine. Between the first and second transaction, another customer used the machine. The man told police that he remembered the encounter vividly. A young black man had just made a withdrawal when he arrived, but he didn't seem to be finished with his business.
He was standing next to him when he got the $100 out. Then he saw the guy try to use the card again. He said he was acting suspicious because he was wondering why it was taking him so long. He'd already seen him take the money out, so he knew he couldn't do it but one time, and here he is up there trying to use it again.
The witness gave a police sketch artist information regarding the suspect's height, weight, coloring, and facial features. Now armed with a detailed description, investigators went to the hospital. Someone recognized the face. It looked like a man who worked in the hospital laundry. The laundry room supervisor confirmed that the picture resembled 23-year-old Michael Sexton. His timesheet showed that he'd been on the job the day of Katie's murder, but disappeared that afternoon. She said he returned around 6:30.
He'd been missing for like 2 hours, and all of a sudden he comes running into the hospital, says he's got to go home, he's been having car trouble, and books. And he doesn't show up for work on Thursday and Friday.
To the detectives, Michael Sexton was acting like a man with something to hide. But they were still a long way from linking him to Katie's rape and murder. Detectives went to the home that Sexton shared with his girlfriend, who allowed them to search the residence. They collected some of his uniforms and pairs of tennis shoes, according to W.E. Hensley.
We collected 3 pairs of tennis shoes, and we took those all into our possession, and of course they were marked as potential evidence items, and we took those back to our lab to analyze for any possible matches.
The suspect's shoes and the muddy floor mats were sent to the Wake County Identification Bureau. There, Johnny Leonard specializes in footprint analysis.
There's one thing about criminals. They may put on gloves, they can put stockings over their faces, but hardly anybody thinks about their feet, because that's what you run with, that's what you walk on. So I always believe that footprints is the most overlooked evidence at crime scenes.
Leonard studied the muddy footprints, looking first for class characteristics like tread pattern. He then looked for individual characteristics like cuts or gouges. Next, he studied the 3 pairs of sneakers taken from the suspect's home.
Looking at the footprints, I could easily say that 2 of the sets of shoes did not make those tracks, because you can obviously look at them and see that the class characteristics were not the same.
But the 3rd pair was a similar size and make as the print from the crime scene. Leonard dusted the bottom of the shoe with magnetic powder. Then, with a wide piece of tape, he lifted the sole design and adhered it to a backing card. The card was placed in a large camera where it would be photographed and transferred to a transparency. Once it was developed, they could lay the transparency over the photograph of the mat for a comparison. But that would take time. They still needed to locate Sexton, who hadn't been seen in days. Detectives in North Carolina worked around the clock investigating the brutal murder of 24-year-old wife and mother, Katie Villoria. A man named Michael Sexton had been identified as a suspect, but had yet to be located. At the crime lab, latent print examiner Johnny Leonard had lifted latent shoe prints from the evidence taken from the crime scene. He placed a transparency of the suspect's sneaker print over a transfer of the floor mat from the victim's car. Leonard compared individual characteristics and finally found what he was looking for.
There was a little cut at the arch of one of the treadwear designs that was present also on the known shoes. So without a doubt, we knew that it was the same, made from the same shoe.
Investigators had evidence that tied the perpetrator to the vehicle, but still had nothing putting him in contact with the victim. While latent shoe prints are usually obtained from flat objects at a crime scene, even irregular surfaces can yield the occasional clue. Leonard applied magnetic powder to the upper sole and heel of the victim's shoe.
And lo and behold, a very small portion of a shoe track appeared.
He set the partial shoe print on a backing card and compared it to the full-size print of the suspect's sneaker. The partial print from Katie Valoria's shoe matched a portion of the suspect's shoe print.
Without a doubt, the suspect had been in contact with the victim personally.
Police went to the home that Sexton shared with his girlfriend, according to Detective Beasley.
The detectives located Michael Sexton at that point. We told him that we were talking to people at the hospital, and it was his turn when he come down and talk with us about it, which he agreed to do.
At the police department, Sexton was cooperative. He agreed to give biological samples for testing. Sexton swabbed the inside of his mouth to give a DNA sample. And he willingly allowed for hairs to be taken. These two would be compared in the lab. Criminalist Hensley recognized the importance of the evidence.
What we were dealing with and what we felt we were dealing with as far as evidence potential in this particular vehicle was blood, body fluids, hairs, fibers, clothing, and those are the things that we concentrated on.
Using a comparison microscope, examiners looked for similarities between two hair samples. Color, length, and diameter are among the major features analyzed. The known sample taken from the victim at autopsy and the unknown sample from the victim's van were compared side by side. The analysis confirmed the victim was not the source of the hair found in the van. But when the hair from the victim's van was compared to the sample taken from the suspect, it was practically a perfect match. That wasn't the only evidence placing Michael Sexton in the back of Katie Valoria's van. To fully process the clothing taken from Sexton's house, technicians laid the clothing out across a wide table. Using clear adhesive tape, they combed every inch of fabric for hair and fibers. Fibers from the victim's van were found on the suspect's clothing, and fibers from the clothing were found in the van. Investigators still needed to determine if the suspect's DNA matched the biological fluids found on the victim.
Certainly the body fluids that we found on the victim's body had the potential for DNA analysis. And they are more or less a positive form of identification. Other than fingerprints, if you can't find fingerprints, that certainly is one of the better forms of identification.
To analyze the suspect's DNA samples, scientists used a process called electrophoresis to separate specific enzymes out of each sample. Certain enzymes vary from person to person. Electrophoresis utilizes an electric current to separate the enzymes for analysis. The sample is placed in a gel, and a current is applied, causing the enzymes to move through the gel. Each enzyme moves a certain distinct distance, creating a pattern of bands. If two blood samples create the same pattern, it's probable they came from the same source. In this case, they matched. At the police station, detectives confronted Sexton with the evidence. he denied everything.
As the interview went on, he kept digging a little bit deeper hole for himself and denying that he even knew her. And I think then he started looking for kind of an out, something that would make him look in the best light.
Sexton told police that he was having car trouble. He said that the victim offered to drive him to his cousin's to get some jumper cables.
And he said when he got around there that she consented to have sex with him, and then when they got in the back of the van, she changed her mind, and he knew she had seen his name tag and all that and was going to report him.
Detectives knew there was more to the story. They believed that Sexton used his car trouble as bait. Fueled by a criminal appetite, he took advantage of Katie's kindness and overpowered her. The people of the state of North Carolina convicted Michael Sexton of first-degree murder and rape. He received the death sentence and was executed in November 2001. When a killer and a victim share no personal history, detectives can find themselves working in the dark. But for investigators committed to finding justice, no piece of evidence is too small. Today, forensic science can uncover a murder and bring to light evidence of a lethal encounter. Every woman's fear becomes all too real for one Southern California woman when an office party takes a violent turn. Investigators must sort out conflicting accounts, unlocking the one clue that turns out to be the key to the truth. In a Portland, Oregon suburb, a 2-year-old toddler is found dead in his bed. His death is ruled accidental, but one investigator remains unconvinced. Using forensic experiments, she is able to reveal the answer that otherwise would be hidden. Solving crimes may begin with intuition, but applied science provides investigators with irrefutable proof. When criminals go to great lengths to mask their crimes, investigators must step up to the challenge and remain undaunted. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The city of Long Beach, California is on the cutting edge of the hottest trends and the hippest night spots. But sometimes the lure of the glittering lights and living life on the fast track leads to danger. 4 a.m. on a warm July night in 1999, Patricia White staggered from an apartment.
Patricia.
She was both disheveled and disoriented.
Just come back in, okay?
She was wearing her business suit and a t-shirt that wasn't hers. A man named Lorenzo Fial frantically tried to get her to come back into his apartment. But she wasn't coming back. She was desperately trying to call 911.
Long Beach Police.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, ma'am?
I need help. I don't know where I am. Hello?
When she finally got through to the Long Beach Police Dispatch, she was confused and dazed and unable to tell police where she was or how she got there.
Okay, what happened to you, ma'am?
I don't know.
Sorry, party, clerical.
10-4 run. The dispatcher sent a team of officers to the scene. The dispatcher kept her on the phone, hoping she'd recognize landmarks that might be a clue to her whereabouts.
Okay, can you see them?
Yeah, they're getting out.
Okay, go ahead and talk to them.
Hold on.
When the officers approached, they immediately sensed that Patricia was not acting right.
Can I talk to you for a minute?
She was frightened and completely disoriented.
You okay?
Patricia told them that she woke up in a strange apartment and wasn't wearing any clothes. She remembered leaving a restaurant the night before, but then she blacked out and didn't know how she got to this location.
I thought it was water and it was really salty and
The officers suspected she was under the influence of either alcohol or drugs.
Do you live here?
no.
Okay, have you been drinking anything?
Patricia said she had had 2 drinks nearly 6 hours earlier.
Just a couple of small drinks?
Lorenzo Fial came down to talk to the officers.
I don't know.
Do you know him?
As a precaution, they checked him for weapons. He was not armed. He told them that Patricia was his girlfriend, and they had been out the night before.
Are you guys out drinking tonight? Having a good time? Yeah.
He said she was very drunk, so he brought her back to his apartment, where she passed out in his bed. He told them that they had not had sex that night.
Who's he?
Patricia told police that she and Fial worked together, and that in fact he was her boss.
Did you guys have sex or
She was still too confused to provide any further details. The officers, concerned about her state of mind and her lack of memory, decided to take her downtown to test her for alcohol.
How long you lived here? Almost 4 years.
Because of the conflicting stories and the fact that Patricia said she didn't remember anything and woke up naked in a strange bed, police asked Fial to accompany them to the police station to make a statement and provide blood samples. He cooperated fully. After taking a breathalyzer test at the police station, Patricia was taken to the hospital. Her blood alcohol level was a .01, 8 times below the legal limit. While Patricia had no memory of a sexual encounter, under the circumstances, police were suspicious. She was sent to the sexual assault examination room for further testing.
Patricia didn't really tell me too much.
One of the responding officers gave the details to Long Beach detective Catherine Kriskovic, a member of the sexual assault unit.
And then she doesn't remember anything after that. Eventually, when I got her to calm down, she told me that she remembers getting in the car.
Did she appear to be under the influence
She appeared to be under the influence.
Detective Kriskovic grew more suspicious when she learned that Patricia said she was given an opened drink.
And she pointed out to you guys the apartment. She was given a drink of what she said tasted like a very salty substance when she had initially asked for water. And she spit it out and again asked for water, took a gulp from the water bottle, and again it tasted salty, but she in fact swallowed this gulp. She does not remember anything after that point until she woke up naked in a bed. This all indicated to me, with my training and experience, that this possibly could be GHB.
GHB, or gamma-hydroxybutyrate, is commonly known as a date rape drug. It has been on the scene in California since the 1980s. GHB is a fluffy white substance resembling powder. When mixed with water, it dissolves and is unnoticeable. The drug usually takes effect in as little as 15 minutes, leaving a victim comatose or unable to move, blanking out their memory for up to 4 to 6 hours.
Try to remember as much as you can.
GHB is completely undetectable in the system after 12 hours. Detective Kriskovic and sexual assault nurse examiner Melinda Waddell had to move fast. They looked for further physical evidence of the effects of this powerful substance.
Get you some fresh air and get you something to drink. At the time that I was speaking to her, she was still in a state of confusion, at times a little disoriented. She was very cooperative and wanting to help, even though she was having a very hard time with the fact that she couldn't remember certain things. and was taking it hard in the sense that she wouldn't be able to provide us information to assist us with our investigation.
Detective Kriskovic urged Patricia to try and piece together what had happened in Fial's apartment.
I woke up in a room, in a bed, and I didn't have any clothes on. I was naked.
She remembered waking up in a strange bed. Fial was there without his shirt on. Embarrassed that she had no clothes on, she told him to leave. He told her she didn't need to be upset, and that a minute ago she had a different attitude.
And I didn't know where I was.
This only frightened Patricia further. Still dazed, Patricia found a t-shirt that wasn't hers, and eventually located the business suit she had worn the night before.
See, I was calling. I couldn't get through.
She collected her belongings and left. She then called 911. Nurse Melinda Waddell.
You can't always judge what type of emotional state any person's going to be in after an attack or an episode like this. Patricia White was shaking, she was tearful, she was confused about what happened to her. I need you to get a urine sample first.
Nurse Waddell began a forensic examination. She asked for a urine sample. This would determine if GHB was in her system. The sample would be sent to the lab to check for the substance. She then conducted a full-body examination. She asked Patricia to remove her clothing.
As we're collecting evidence, we have no idea what the significance of any piece of evidence is going to be until later in the investigation. And at the same time, the forensic nurse will examine her entire body, and we're looking for scratches, bruises, bite marks, anything in her hair, anywhere on her clothing, any piece of evidence that could help put the story together of what happened to her. After we examine her entire body, we also use a special lamp called a Woods lamp, and that's an ultraviolet light. Then we scan her body. If there's any dried secretions or substances on her body that will fluoresce positive, we can see it with this light, and then we collect a sample. And we did have a positive sample on Patricia. Samples?
Melinda Waddell discovered dried semen on Patricia's body. Vaginal and anal swabs also indicated the presence of seminal fluid.
First thing I'm going to do, Patricia, is just take a look.
She proceeded with a pelvic exam using a colposcope, a microscope fitted with a 35mm camera so that pictures can be taken of the internal tissue.
In Patricia's case, we found some abrasions on her cervix. Normally, the cervix does not have any type of injury or abrasions on it, even with their story of non-consensual intercourse. It's very difficult to cause any type of self-inflicted injury on the face of the cervix. So it's a significant finding when we do see it.
During consensual sex, most women's bodies experience a natural arousal response,
Samples just from the
making it
outside.
difficult to injure the cervix during intercourse. The bruising on Patricia's cervix indicated she was not a willing participant. Internal abrasions and hemorrhaging also indicated forcible sodomy.
The conclusion that we can draw whenever we find an abrasion or a tear or a bruise that there was some type of injury created, and that's from blunt force trauma. We can't say what caused that injury, but that something was inserted and created an injury. We also can't really testify to the fact whether it was consensual or non-consensual unless the injury was severe, and then we could say that was extremely painful, and who would consent to that type of force.
The hours of speculation ended.
That we've talked about, some antibiotics.
Nurse Melinda Waddell concluded Patricia White was raped.
Tablet that I already gave you. I'm gonna take these.
Patricia's worst fears were now confirmed, and she was determined to find out how and why it happened. After a long night of questions, Long Beach investigators had at least one answer. Patricia White had been raped. She remembered little more than waking up naked in her boss, Lorenzo Fial's bed.
Anybody answering?
Because she blacked out and couldn't remember how she got there, Detective Catherine Kriskovic suspected she was given the date rape drug GHB. While she awaited the toxicology findings, Detective Kriskovic wanted to hear Fial's version of events.
Really like it. This is Mark Chevy's new blonde.
An officer went to the car dealership where he worked as the sales manager.
Come have a seat if you like.
Can you tell me what happened yesterday with Miss White?
Oh.
The officer asked Fial about the events of the evening.
After we got off work.
Right.
We're just gonna celebrate. We had a lot of food. We had about 15.
He said that it was his birthday, and they had gone out to celebrate at a restaurant. Patricia had parked her car at a friend's house and rode to the restaurant with some other co-workers. Fial said that it was quite a party, with lots of food and liquor. He said that Patricia drank too much and was acting a little crazy. She was definitely coming on to Fial.
Oh, I need two.
Pour you a drink. She had way more to drink than she normally does, so...
Fial claimed she was so drunk he offered to drive.
Instead of have her drive, I thought we...
This information matched his earlier statement. But then his story changed.
That was one of the weird things about her.
He admitted that he actually did sleep with Patricia, but said that it was consensual.
Just kind of woke up.
Worried about losing his job and trying to keep their relationship a secret was the reason he lied to police.
Caused her to dial 911 or call the police?
He claimed they had been seeing each other for a couple of months
I have no idea.
and had had sex on more than one occasion.
And just started yelling.
Detective Kriskovic contacted several of the people who attended the party that night.
Good afternoon. This is Detective Catherine Kriskovic with Long Beach Police
All of them
Department.
corroborated
And I'm
Fial's
calling in
story.
regards to a situation that I'm involved in.
They said that Patricia was drunk and came on to him.
A cocktail, okay.
The case was shaping up to be Patricia White's word against Lorenzo Fial's. Detective Kriskovic looked up Fial's record. She discovered that he had 3 prior convictions for robbery, cocaine possession, and spousal abuse. That proved nothing. Though he had a criminal past, he wasn't necessarily a rapist. But someone was clearly lying. Detective Kriskovic hoped the forensic lab would determine who was telling the truth. Patricia's urine samples were sent to the LA County Coroner's Office. Supervising criminalist Dan Anderson was assigned the case.
Detective Kriskovic contacted me directly to analyze this particular urine sample from what they called a credible rape victim. Because we are the coroner's office and we deal principally with postmortem samples, we don't routinely do antemortem or live people's urines or blood samples. Because we were the only lab in the area that could do a GHB analysis at that particular time, I said that they could bring it on over and we'd be willing to help them out.
Anderson proceeded with the GHB testing. He obtained 2 urine samples. He needed to compare the original sample from the morning of the assault to one from several days later to act as a control sample. The control sample would tell him how much GHB was normal in Patricia's body.
GHB, or gamma hydroxybutyrate, is a natural substance in your body. As a toxicologist, you normally won't see it, or you will see it at very, very low levels. So if someone actually took the GHB, it'd be a large amount either in the blood or urine sample.
Both of the urine samples are individually combined with chemicals that separate the GHB from the specimens. The isolated GHB samples are then placed in a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, or GCMS. There, it converts them into a gas and measures the levels of GHB in each specimen. Patricia's normal GHB level was 1 microgram per milliliter. Yet, the sample taken the morning of the alleged assault showed 424 micrograms per milliliter. Patricia White had a large amount of GHB in her system. Detective Kriskovic spoke with Patricia again to tell her what Fial had said about their relationship.
But I want to ask you again.
Patricia was stunned when she heard that Fial had said that they were dating and had been intimate before. She said she had known Fial for nearly 7 years, but claimed they never had a sexual relationship. Patricia White talks about that night.
So I didn't know him. It was a working relationship. He was my boss. He was in control of the dealership, and he was in control of my paychecks. So that's how I knew him.
Ready? Come on.
Again, her story contradicted what Fial had said.
I was the most sober out of everybody, so I was the one driving because I had only 2 drinks.
I told him, you know, the only way that I would go with him is if I would drive.
And once you arrived at the liquor store, what happened?
They went over the events of that night once again.
To drink and came out.
She said Fial had stopped to get some vodka. Patricia asked if he'd get her a bottle of water.
He gave me the water, and it was horrible tasting. And then within like 5 minutes of that, very short distance, that I don't have any memory at all.
Patricia White's memory was hazy. She was still confused about exactly what happened that night. But what she did know was she had been raped, and large amounts of GHB were found in her system.
Even that's fuzzy. I don't remember.
How it got there was a mystery. And the one person who might provide answers was the last person to see her before she passed out. And that was Lorenzo Fial. Long Beach detective Catherine Kriskovic was trying to sort out exactly what happened to Patricia White the night she was assaulted.
It was very salty and...
Patricia had been raped, and large amounts of an illegal substance, GHB, a date rape drug, was found in her system. Her last memory was of her boss, Lorenzo Fial, offering her a drink of water that tasted oddly salty.
Don't pour it out, just drink it.
She then woke up several hours later, naked in his bed.
What happened yesterday?
Lorenzo Fial says the two were involved in a consensual sexual relationship. But Patricia White's internal injuries told a different story.
Well, he was sitting in my lap.
Forensic examiners compared the semen samples found inside Patricia White's body to DNA samples taken from Lorenzo Fial earlier in the investigation. They matched. Detective Kriskovic had enough evidence to make an arrest. Lorenzo Fial was arrested and charged with 6 felony counts, including kidnapping, rape with the use of drugs, and sodomy with the use of drugs. Kriskovic obtained a search warrant for Fial's personal property. If he could be linked to the GHB, they'd have an open and shut case.
I then started to write a search warrant in order for us to go out to the different locations, their residence as well as their workplace, in an attempt to possibly locate any of the water bottles or anything maybe inside the residence, which would indicate that they might have made it at their home or work location.
During a search of his car, they recovered some water bottles and sent them to the lab for further analysis. The lab conducted tests to determine if the water was tainted with GHB. The results were inconclusive. This did not deter Detective Kriskovic.
This is Detective Kriskovic.
With the positive urine test for GHB, Nurse Melinda Waddell's findings, and the testimony of the victim, she felt that the district attorney had a strong case. Long Beach Deputy DA Christopher Frisco agreed, but he knew it would be far from easy.
Whenever you have a situation where the victim and the defendant know each other, this almost always lends itself to a defense of consent, especially when the defendant's DNA was recovered from her in the form of semen. I mean, if it's really his word against her word, then how do you know it's not consensual?
Frisco questioned Patricia further and prepared her for the trial. He knew the defense would try to discredit her testimony, but he was so confident she was a credible witness, he encouraged her to take the stand. It paid off. The jury also believed Patricia.
Patricia testified that she was driving the vehicle that she was in with Lorenzo Fial. He had given her a liquid that was clear. She drank it. It tasted much like ocean water. She spit it out. The defense was never able to explain how Patricia White got GHB in her body. They were never able to explain how it was that Patricia White could accurately describe the feeling of being under the influence of GHB and the taste of GHB as tasting salty.
I think when I woke up the next morning.
Based on the evidence, investigators pieced together what they believe happened that evening.
I was nauseous.
After the party, Fial went to the liquor store to buy some vodka and a bottle of water for Patricia. He then laced the water with GHB and offered it to Patricia.
I asked for my water, and I took a big drink of it because I was really thirsty. And it just tasted so bad that I spit most of it out.
No, it's
Come on,
salty.
wait a minute. Don't pour it out. Just drink it. Here.
No.
Let me switch. I'm going to drive.
And then my next memory is being in a bed with him throwing back the covers on the bed and me being naked and not being able to move and not being able to see past like 1.5 feet.
On March 27, 2000, Lorenzo Fial was convicted of 4 counts of rape and sodomy with a drug and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He never admitted to any wrongdoing.
No regrets, no remorse, no nothing, no admission of nothing. He actually said to me that it's only 3 of us that know what actually happened. There's him, I, and God would make me pay for this.
Today, Patricia White works with the Rape Crisis Center in Long Beach, helping to educate law enforcement agencies and schools about the dangers of GHB. The determination of forensic investigators to search for the truth resulted in justice for Patricia White. But when Oregon authorities are confronted with a child's mysterious death, they discover that the answers they seek depend on asking the right questions. Coquille is located in coastal Oregon and sits beneath the Three Sisters mountain range along the Coquille River. An ideal place to bring up a child. On September 1st, 1999, Denise Carter and her live-in boyfriend, Stacy Brown, celebrated Denise's birthday over breakfast. Around 9:15, Denise noticed her 2.5-year-old son, Mikey, had not awakened. Concerned, she asked Stacy to check in on the toddler. He discovered the boy lying motionless on the bed, and he would not wake up. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Stacy alerted Denise.
Trust me, something's not right.
The baby was not breathing.
911, what is your emergency?
A dispatcher took the call and immediately sent an ambulance.
How old?
Within minutes, paramedics and officers from the Coquille Police Department raced to Denise's home. Denise rushed them into the child's room. But Mikey was already dead. Denise and Stacy were devastated.
For just a minute, please.
Yeah.
The circumstances surrounding Mikey's death raised suspicions.
We can go someplace else.
Assistant Deputy Medical Examiner Chris Karsher was called to the scene to investigate.
I'm so sorry. What's going on?
Denise and Stacy said Mikey was fine the night before, and neither of them noticed anything unusual. Denise had turned in early. Stacy had stayed up with Mikey. He said that when he put the child to bed, he was fine. Karsher decided to look through the house in search of an explanation as to why Mikey had died. The forensic team was already gathering evidence at the location. As Karsher entered Mikey's room, she began to notice something unusual. The child's bed was relatively undisturbed.
The one thing that you did notice was the way he was laying, and several of the detectives, as the morning progressed, would look at him and say he looks staged. It looks like, you know, somebody's laid him there and positioned him, and it looked staged. Another detective on scene thought that the diaper just wasn't right. It wasn't wrinkled enough, or I can remember thinking that at the time. That's not the way my 2.5-year-old slept when he was 2.5. You know, he would have been all over the bed.
Karsher also noticed that the bathtub had a small amount of water in it. Wet towels lay on the floor. Crime technicians from the Oregon State Police Lab took samples of some red stains found on the child's bed. They conducted a presumptive blood test. The results were negative.
I just want to wait for these people to get out of here.
Once Karsher was satisfied she had fully investigated the home, she asked Stacy and Denise a few additional questions.
He was trying to comfort her. She was crying. When I asked the two of them what they thought might have happened to Mikey, Stacy Brown told me that he probably choked on something.
I think he choked.
Stacy claimed Mikey would put anything he could get his hands on in his mouth.
I pulled a rubber band out of his mouth yesterday, and
I know that we'll have
to Chris Karsher, there were still too many unanswered questions.
I was concerned that a 2.5-year-old was dead, and we didn't have any reason for him to be dead. You're always suspicious at that point. He had no health problems. He had not been injured in the days before. He had eaten well the night before. He had gone to bed like normal the night before. And so there was no reason for him to be dead.
The child's body was transported to Bay Area Hospital for autopsy. Chris Karcher assisted. Initially, the autopsy did not reveal anything out of the ordinary.
Is there any hemorrhages in the soft tissue?
Yet when they examined the child's airway, they discovered a foreign object lodged in his throat.
The autopsy was basically unremarkable until we got to his airway, and then we found a cellophane that was from a cigarette wrapper that had been inhaled real tightly down in his airway.
Cause of death was asphyxiation. And although water was found in his lungs, forensic examiners thought it was due to the asphyxiation. Yet something still bothered Chris Karcher. She noticed that the printed tax stamp was still intact on the cigarette wrapper. The baby's saliva had not dissolved the image. This, coupled with the other evidence, left too many clues unanswered. Investigator Karcher was determined to find out why this baby died. In Coquille, Oregon, a seemingly healthy 2.5-year-old Mikey Carter was found dead in his bed. Assistant Deputy Medical Examiner Chris Karcher had discovered a cellophane cigarette wrapper lodged in his throat. It was determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation. But to Chris Karcher, something about the evidence at the crime scene and the cigarette wrapper itself did not add up. She decided to perform a simple experiment. She placed a cellophane wrapper from an identical pack of cigarettes in an ordinary glass of drinking water.
One of the things that I started thinking about was how pristine that stamp was on the bottom of that cellophane, and I got to wondering if a child was chewing on that, how well would the stamp stay on? And so I decided, well, you know, let's try and see what it would take to get that stamp off.
When Karcher returned to the beaker of water, she found that the stamp remained intact. The findings troubled her for days.
So I thought, well, that would not represent what saliva might do to a stamp. That there surely must be enzymes and such in saliva, and that would be the best way to determine. So I then put cellophane in my mouth and kept it in my mouth on a short drive one day, about a half hour.
When she got back to her office, she examined the wrapper.
And when I took it out of my mouth, the stamp was almost gone. All that told me at the time was that it wasn't in his mouth very long. What few places on the piece of cellophane that I had between my teeth, it poked holes in the cellophane. And what had come from Mikey's throat had no holes in it. The cellophane was all intact, as well as the stamp.
Karcher recalled that Stacy Brown had said the little boy was curious and was always stuffing things in his mouth and chewing on them. Yet there were no bite marks on the cellophane. At the Children's Advocacy Center, Chris Karcher reviewed the case with the Coos County Child Fatality Review Team. Over the next several days, a team of investigators continued to pore over the facts. Detectives Vaughn Edsel of the North Bend Police Department and Pete Lichty of the Coos County Sheriff's Office joined the investigation.
The first step was to obviously go over the existing material with a fine-tooth comb, try to identify any inconsistencies or any other questions that remained unanswered. At the same time we were doing that, a profile was being put together on Mr. Brown and Mrs. Carter and the immediate family, so we could have a roadmap on how to proceed with the investigation.
Detective Edsel asked Stacy and Denise to come down to the station to write out what they remembered about the night Mikey died. When Stacy finished his statement, he was eager to leave and wanted to know why Denise was taking so long.
When I first met Stacy Brown, my initial observations of him were that he was very guarded and very cautious. The more time I spent with Mr. Brown, the more he became agitated and the more he became defensive and very guarded.
Denise appeared more cooperative, and her statement was a detailed 11 pages. After finishing their statements, Stacy became angry with Denise. He was nervous, almost paranoid about what she had written in her statement. Detective Lichty remembered Stacy's volatile behavior.
Mr. Brown finished relatively quickly in comparison to Mrs. Carter. It took him quite a bit of time to produce those 2 1/4 pages because he was giving it quite a bit of thought. I noticed that he was thinking quite a bit about what he was writing, whereas Mrs. Carter was just writing pretty much free thought, which was encouraging for us because we thought it would reveal some details.
Detectives Lichty and Edsel reviewed the written statements and found inconsistencies. They then ran background checks on both. Stacy Brown's report indicated a long history of violence.
Detective Edsel, take a look at this.
Brown also had a record of alcohol and drug-related offenses.
Menacing here.
What do you think?
I think we should contact his probation officer.
Okay.
Let's go.
They dug deeper into his criminal past.
I learned that he was currently on probation and actually for menacing a former girlfriend of his, where the encounter had evolved into a pretty violent ending where Mr. Brown refused to leave the relationship.
How long ago was that?
The probation officer also confirmed that Stacy had a drug problem, specifically with methamphetamine and marijuana.
Appears to have a short fuse.
Investigators would not let up and met often to go over the case. They went over everything, looking for anything they might have missed.
Well, there is one thing that I'm not sure how important it is, but there was standing water that I noticed in the bathtub.
One crime scene photo particularly disturbed Chris Karcher. It was of the bathtub and a small amount of water. Karcher wasn't sure what it meant, but the evidence did not square with Denise and Stacy's testimony. Denise had said that no one had taken a bath or shower the evening before. Investigators now knew they weren't getting the whole story. Detectives Lichty and Edsel decided to ask Stacy and Denise to take lie detector tests. They agreed. But on the day the test was to be administered, Denise showed up and told them Stacy had changed his mind.
I don't know. Then last night he started screaming at me about coming in today. He didn't want me to come in.
Yet shortly thereafter, Stacy showed up at the front desk.
I need to talk to my wife.
He had changed his mind again and now agreed to do the polygraph after all.
Detective Lichty?
Excuse me. Yes.
Mr. Brown is here.
Denise took the test first.
Will you honestly answer the questions about Mikey's death?
Yes.
The polygraph results on Mrs. Carter proved that she was answering her questions truthfully. The reverse was true for Mr. Brown.
Did you put that cigarette cellophane wrapper into Mikey's throat? No. Are you worried?
Stacy not only appeared agitated, his involuntary response, picked up on the lie detector test, revealed deception. Stacy became so upset after the test, he created a scene at the police headquarters.
I really got to see my wife now. Now.
During this time, Mr. Brown was outside in the lobby waiting for Mrs. Carter and started to create a scene. He started becoming agitated. He started to become angry. And he was actually escorted by uniformed officers outside the building because of his aggressive behavior. Stacy didn't
Detective
do very
Lichty told Denise privately that Stacy had not done well
Do you know
on the
of any
polygraph
instances
test.
where that has occurred?
Denise was stunned and angry.
And we have some concerns about your safety as far as you going home with them this evening.
Because of Stacy's erratic behavior, he suggested she go to the Women's Crisis Center.
We were concerned that something would happen that evening. So we encouraged Mrs. Carter to stay at the Coos Bay Police Department until we could make arrangements with the Coos County Women's Crisis Center and have her placed in a safe home until she felt comfortable in returning or making other suitable arrangements. She declined. Okay. Thank you. Excuse me, Mark.
Shortly after Denise
Detective
left,
Pete Lichty.
Lichty received a disturbing call.
Is Mrs. Carter okay?
The pressure of the investigation had pushed Stacy Brown too far. He had threatened and assaulted Denise. He was arrested for domestic menacing. And having been convicted for domestic abuse before, he was all too familiar with the procedure. It appeared that Stacy Brown was not the devoted family man he professed to be the night of Mikey's death. And perhaps he knew more than he was letting on. If he did, investigators were almost certain to find out. In Oregon, the Coos County Sheriff's Office was investigating the death of 2.5-year-old Mikey Carter, who appeared to have choked to death on a cellophane cigarette wrapper. But authorities were beginning to suspect the child's death was not an accident. Mikey's mother, Denise, and her boyfriend, Stacy Brown, were the only other people in the house at the time of the incident.
104, 125.
Stacy Brown's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and it culminated in his arrest for domestic menacing. The day after he was picked up, Detectives Lichty and Edsel visited Denise at the library where she worked.
Mrs. Carter, excuse me.
She was visibly shaken. And now that Stacy was safely in police custody, she wanted to get something off her chest.
Can we sit?
Sure. Did you have an affair with
She told them that a few months earlier, her ex-husband had spent the night at her house on Stacy's birthday.
Brought it up a lot. He was very
Stacy had found out about the affair. He had discovered some of her ex-husband's personal belongings at Denise's house.
Hey.
Hey.
When Stacy confronted her with them, she told him he had stopped by.
What would his cigarettes be doing in,
But then she confessed the affair.
on my birthday?
Stacy became violent when he learned they had been together on his birthday.
Mrs. Carter told us that this particular issue was a consistent reminder to Mr. Brown that she had been unfaithful to him. Mr. Brown consistently barraged her with accusations and usually ending that with, "How could you have done this on my birthday of all days?"
Mikey Carter was found dead on Denise's birthday. The detectives now had motive. It appeared that Stacy wanted to get even for her affair, and he did it on her birthday. Detectives confronted Stacy Brown with Denise's story. On a hunch, they asked him about the unexplained water in the bathtub.
Detective Lichty asked Mr. Brown about the standing water in the tub. Mr. Brown had a pretty dramatic reversal of what had been reported. Mr. Brown suggested that if there were water in Mikey's lungs, he could account for the presence of that water. Now, up to this point, there had been no indication that Mikey was anywhere near water during the time before his death.
Finally, Stacy confessed to murdering 2.5-year-old Mikey Carter. He told them that he had given Mikey a bath.
Mike?
Enraged by Denise's infidelity, he tried to drown the child. Unsuccessful in his first attempt, he carried the child back to his bed, where he jammed the cellophane wrapper down his throat, cutting off his airway.
Mr. Brown admitted that while Mikey was still breathing, he removed a piece of cellophane from the cigarette pack and inserted it into Mikey's throat to make it appear that Mikey had choked.
Inside, I knew that he had done this. I just knew he had. And I guess at this point, I just am thrilled that we went ahead and did it, and that Detective Etzel and Detective Lichty did such a dynamite job.
Stacy Brown was convicted of first-degree murder and received 25 years to life. As long as criminals try to hide their crimes, investigators will work to expose them. Though perpetrators believe they have covered their tracks, forensic scientists continue to develop new techniques and use their instincts to bring the guilty to justice.